On a morning in 1967, somewhere over the central highlands of South Vietnam, a 19-year-old specialist sat behind an M60 machine gun mounted in the open doorway of a UH-1 Huey helicopter. Below him, a landing zone no bigger than a baseball diamond was carved into triple canopy jungle. His helicopter was third in a flight of 10. The first two ships had touched down clean. No fire, no movement, just elephant grass bending under rotor wash. Then the tree line erupted. Muzzle flashes lit up three sides of the clearing. Rounds punched through the Huey's aluminium skin like tin foil. The pilot committed to the approach. There was nowhere else to go. The door gunner pressed trigger and poured fire into the trees, spent brass cascading past his boots, the gun vibrating so hard his teeth rattled. The helicopter touched down for exactly 4 seconds. Soldiers jumped. The ship pulled pitch and climbed out. He did it 6 more times that day. 6 approaches, 6 tree lines, 6 chances for a round to find the fuel cell, the pilot, or him. This was the job. No doors, no armor, no protection except an M60 machine gun and the skill of the pilot at the controls. An open seat in an open helicopter descending into gunfire at 80 knots. During the Vietnam War, more than 40,000 Americans served as helicopter crew members. Over 4,800 helicopters were destroyed. Thousands of pilots and crew were killed. Door gunners had one of the highest casualty rates of any military specialty in the entire war. Their average age was 19. And before 1962, the job didn't even exist. No training manual, no doctrine, no precedent in the history of warfare. So how did a role that no one had ever imagined become the most dangerous seat in Vietnam? The answer begins not in Vietnam, but at Fort Benning, Georgia, in 1962. The Army had a problem. On a nuclear battlefield, conventional ground forces massed in columns and convoys would be obliterated in minutes. The solution, according to the Howze Board, a panel of generals and tacticians convened by Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, was radical. Save trucks and armored vehicles with helicopters. Move entire infantry battalions by air. Strike fast, extract faster, and never present a fixed target. The 11th Air Assault Division was activated to test the concept. Thousands of soldiers trained with hundreds of helicopters, rehearsing what the Army called airmobile warfare. It worked in theory. It worked in exercises. But the tests revealed a problem no one had solved. A helicopter on final approach is the most vulnerable vehicle in any military. It's slow, it's loud, it follows a predictable glide path. And in the last seconds before touchdown, there is no evasive action. The pilot is committed. If the enemy is waiting below, the aircraft has to absorb whatever comes. Someone needed to shoot back from the helicopter itself, and the door gunner was born. The first ones were improvised. Soldiers held M60 machine guns on bungee cords, firing from the open cargo bay with no mounts, no sights, and no formal training. They figured it out in the air. The Army eventually standardized the role with pintle-mounted M60Ds bolted to the doorframe. Later came the M134 minigun, a 6-barreled rotary weapon capable of firing 6,000 rounds per minute from a moving helicopter. The concept received its baptism in November 1965 when the 1st Cavalry Division flew into the Ia Drang Valley. At landing zones X-Ray and Albany, door gunners flew into the heaviest combat Americans had faced since Korea. Helicopters were shot down on approach. Crews were killed in their seats. The role was no longer experimental. It was the most essential and most exposed position in the war. The most exposed position in the war looked like this. A door gunner woke before dawn, walked to the flight line, and climbed into his Huey. He didn't know what the day would bring. Some mornings it was a combat assault, 10 or 20 helicopters in formation, carrying an infantry company into a landing zone that might be quieter, might be a kill zone. Some mornings it was a medevac extraction, dropping into a firefight to pull out wounded while rounds came through the floor. Some days it was resupply to a firebase near the Cambodian border. Others, it was inserting a 6-man LRRP team into triple canopy jungle and coming back days later to pull them out under fire. He flew them all. Each one was a different kind of fear. The mechanics were brutal. A Huey on final approach descends at a fixed angle, roughly 60 to 80 knots, into a clearing the enemy has likely been watching for hours. The door gunner's job is to suppress fire from an unstable platform while the pilot commits to the landing. In those final seconds, there is no evasive action. You ride it in. If the tree line opens up, you fire at muzzle flashes and hope the pilot holds steady long enough for the grunts to get off. Then you pull pitch, climb out, and circle back to do it again. The men who sat in that door lived by rules no field manual covered. Never stop firing on a hot LZ. Count your tracers because when they change color, you're running dry. Watch for muzzle flashes, not movement, because by the time you see a man in the tree line, it's already too late. And know that the enemy is aiming at two things: the engine above your head and the cockpit right in front of you. You're sitting next to both. One of the men who lived those rules was Jack Moe. He arrived in Vietnam in June 1967 and served as a crew chief and door gunner on a Huey with the Red Knights of the 114th Aviation Company. Decades later, he sat down on camera and described what the job was actually like.
And I was a crew chief and door gunner on that helicopter, depending if we were on the ground or flying. And I also had another crew member, which was assigned as a door gunner, that flew on the opposite side of the helicopter. And he and I both did the same thing. We protected the helicopter on its flanks with an M60 and our other weapons that we had. And then we had a pilot and a co-pilot. And then depending on what we were assigned to do that day, we were ready for battle basically every day. And we'd leave sometimes at dark, wouldn't get back until after dark.
On the ground, the infantry knew exactly what the door gunner meant to them. When a squad jumped from a Huey into chest-high grass with rounds cracking past, the only covering fire they had was the man on the M60 above. Grunts remembered which gunners kept firing. They remembered the ones who didn't come back. The North Vietnamese and Viet Cong were not slow learners. They studied American helicopter tactics the way they studied everything else. Patiently, methodically, and with lethal results. By 1966, the NVA had developed formal anti-aircraft doctrine designed specifically to destroy helicopters. They positioned heavy weapons along known flight corridors, around probable landing zones, and on the hilltops American pilots used as navigation points. The weapon that changed everything was the Soviet-supplied DShK 12.7mm heavy machine gun. American crews called it the .51 caliber. It could shred a Huey's aluminium airframe from over a kilometer away. A single burst could sever a tail boom, punch through the transmission, or kill every man in the cockpit. When door gunners heard the deep, slow thudding of a .51 caliber, they knew they were in a different kind of fight. Then, the enemy refined their approach. They learned to let the first helicopters land unopposed, drawing the entire flight into the LZ. Then, they opened fire on the second and third waves, when the zone was committed and crowded with aircraft on the ground. Door gunners in the trailing ships flew into kill zones that hadn't existed 30 seconds earlier. There was no warning until the tracers started rising. During the Tet Offensive of January 1968, helicopter losses surged. Door gunners flew mission after mission into urban combat the Huey was never designed for. Rockets and small arms came from rooftops, alleys, windows. The open paddies and tree lines they understood were replaced by a battlefield with no clear fields of fire. But the worst was still coming. In February 1971, Operation Lam Son 719 sent American helicopters into Laos to support a South Vietnamese ground offensive along Route 9. The NVA had concentrated anti-aircraft weapons along every approach. Over 100 helicopters were destroyed. More than 600 were damaged. Door gunners flew into the most concentrated anti-aircraft fire American aviators had faced since World War II. The enemy had spent 6 years learning how to kill helicopters. At Lam Son 719, they proved they had mastered it. The numbers tell part of the story. During the Vietnam War, the United States lost 4,869 helicopters. Over 4,800 pilots and crew members were killed. Thousands more were wounded. At the peak of the war, a door gunner flying daily combat missions had a statistical life expectancy measured in weeks. By the numbers, they were among the most expendable men in Vietnam. But numbers don't capture what the job did to the men who survived it. A door gunner saw the war from a perspective no one else had. He flew a platoon into a landing zone in the morning, watched them jump into the grass, and flew away. Hours later, he came back. The platoon was smaller. Faces he remembered from the morning were on stretchers now, or in body bags, or gone entirely. He loaded what was left onto his helicopter, flew them out, and the next morning he carried new men into a new LZ. He did this for 12 months. One veteran, a crew chief with the 1st Cavalry Division, put it simply. You dropped guys off and picked up what was left of them. After a while, you stopped learning names. The door gunner was a uniquely American invention, born from a uniquely American approach to war. Solve the problem with technology, mobility, and firepower. And it worked. Air mobility gave the United States an advantage no other army in Vietnam could match. But like Firebase Crook, like the Claymore, tactical brilliance couldn't overcome strategic reality. You could fly anywhere in Vietnam in under an hour. You just couldn't stay. The helicopter and the young man sitting in its open door with his hand on an M60 became the defining image of the war. Not because it won, it didn't, but because it captured everything Vietnam was. Speed and vulnerability, power and exposure, the ability to go anywhere, and the impossibility of holding anything. More than 40,000 men climbed into those doors. Most of them were 19 years old, and for the ones who made it home, the door never really closed. If this story was worth your time, subscribe to Inside the Vietnam War, because for every battle you've heard of, there are hundreds of it. We tell those stories here. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.